What if they declared a war and no one showed up to fight? Rob Karelsfeld mutters to himself, repeating an oft-quoted line that a lot of the Free Allegra fundamentalists would say at rallies when the question was brought up as to what people would do if the coalition started a war. The question was taken after some anti-war slogan from centuries past, but its message still rang true then. Now today, years after Rob first heard the question, he was seeing how things played out. Of course, the scenario that he was now seeing wasn't anything like what those who wanted a free Allegra thought of. They were only talking about the coalition sending out some sort of edict to rip everyone's husbands, mothers, sons, and daughters from them for the war effort. They thought that everyone would just be cannon fodder on the front lines against the Alexandrian Republic, or something like that. Every theory required the fighting to be thousands upon thousands of light years away. In reality, it was much, much closer. Looking at the horizon, Rob lets out a sad sigh as the glowing embers of war cast an eerie red glow on the once bluish aqua skies of Allegra. Allegra was being attacked by an alien race that came from beyond the Milky Way, if the reports were to be trusted. Since the reports were leaked by Allegrian militia sources, Rob can't help but think that they were. The militia was made up of his own Allegrian kinsmen, who had nothing to prove and no agenda to serve, other than keeping their fellow Allegrians alive. The coalition could have spun these stories just to scare them. It wouldn't have been a reach to believe as much if it was the coalition who first broke the news. Looking down from the horizon line, Rob looks over the now-defunct mining operations in the valley below him. There are hundreds of evaporation ponds, where lithium and potash were both being recovered to feed the coalition's war machine. Now those resources are lying there, drying out under the unforgiving Allegrian sun, waiting for the invasion to end so that production can resume. However, once the fighting was over, Rob hoped that the resources might go to feed Allegra and no one else. Millions of Allegrians also wanted the same thing. They were done with the coalition's rule. For the time being, the coalition didn't seem to be the primary enemy. Rob found that truth to be unsettling, but he wasn't in this fight for the sake of thinking out the philosophy of it all. He was here, and he was fighting to make sure that his home kept standing, that his family kept breathing, and in the hopes that the future of Allegra might be free. Philosophy could wait until the war was over. Captain Karelsfeld First Lieutenant Rambard calls out from below. Rob's eyes drop once more as he looks down the hillside at the young lieutenant, who had defected to the Allegrian militia alongside him just a few weeks prior. The man had already seen more fighting and more death in those few weeks than what a lot of veteran soldiers saw in their whole careers. Yet, like everyone under Rob, Lieutenant Rambard somehow kept breathing and could fight on into another day. Swallowing, Rob nods and calls back. "What is it, Rambard?" "The boys are ready to take another run at them," Rampart reports. "They've resupplied and the wounded are all squared away." "What's the plan, sir?" Looking back toward the burning horizon, Rob lets out a long, sad sigh. He and his team had been fighting hard to try and capture a coalition weapons depot deep behind what was supposed to be friendly lines. Beyond the burning horizon, half of Allegra had fallen to the alien invaders, which were known as beats by those fighting them on the front. Those same soldiers who were fighting on the front were wearing coalition colors, but Rob knew that they were the ones who were truly fighting to free Allegra right now. While the coalition was a foe to what Rob knew was right for himself and his people, he can't help but be reminded that oppression oftentimes seemed like a better option, when annihilation was the alternative. Simultaneously, he can't help but pine for the thought of a future of freedom. However, the burning horizon keeps drawing Rob back into rethinking everything that he is currently doing. Here he is, far from the real fighting for the planet, and he is doing nothing other than killing soldiers who could have been fighting off the alien invaders. Now those same soldiers, plus a few of his own, are all lying dead in the killing field. Looking back at the defunct mine, Rob now looks at the scattered dead. There are a handful of his own men lying out there, all exactly where they had first hit the ground, never to rise. All around those friendly casualties are other soldiers, but these are wearing coalition colors. Some are still alive and he can see them moving, and, when the wind is just right, he can hear their cries for help. Though the injured are in the severe minority, most of those wearing coalition colors down in the old mine site are dead. By the current working count, there are 140 dead coalition soldiers. Meanwhile, Rob knew that he had 24 KIA and 50 wounded. The numbers weren't great, but Rob was pleased that they weren't higher. His people had killed more enemies than their entire troop was made up of. He had marched into this valley with 136 men, and Rob knew, even then, that they would be facing down approximately 250 coalition soldiers. It was nearly 2-1 against him. Now the odds were just about even, since several of his wounded were still in fighting shape. This fight was nearly over. Rob knew that it would just take one more charge, and they could clear out the remainder of the coalition soldiers, maybe even take some prisoners too, and get some more intel which he could pass on to his superior, Hurley Nels, who would then pass things along to the rest of the Allegrian militia. Sir Rambart prompts after a few moments had passed. "Get the coalition leader down there on the radio," Rob orders. "We need to talk." "But sir, Nels ordered us to kill them all," Rambart reminds him. Shaking his head, Rob counters, "Our fight ain't back here. It's on the front." "I'm done." Sir Rambart cocks his head, motioning at the red horizon. Rob says, "You see the same fires that I do over there. They're fighting and dying for Allegra. And we've got the weapons and manpower to spare. I've heard some messages of what's going on out there, and they need every man that they can get. That front that's on fire is called the Bulwark, and I've got friends out there. I don't know about you, but I don't see our little raids back here doing much to kill the beats. My friends in the Bulwark, however, are doing a lot of killing." Rambart nods then. "Then I'll get it done, sir." Rob sighs yet again as he looks at the fighting to the west. He can't help but imagine just how hot the fires might be burning, just how loud the detonation of artillery was, and just how many men were being killed. Rob hadn't even seen a beat since they first arrived. He had only been killing coalition soldiers at the order of Nels. After hearing the chatter on the radios about the global slaughter on all of the fronts tonight as the beats attacked, he can't help but feel like he had been fighting against himself this whole time. Nels had always been a hardline anti-coalition fighter. He had talked Rob into joining the militia years ago, even as Rob and thousands of other militia members kept wearing coalition colors. When they got the chance, they all changed sides and started fighting those they once served alongside. Looking back, Rob can't help but think that all of that fighting was counteracting everything that he wanted. Sure, the coalition wasn't his friend. Rob had lost too many people to the coalition's iron fist. However, he can't help but think that they may not be his enemy right now either. Still in thought, Rob idly reaches to his radio, turns it on, and then tunes it to listen in on the coalition's chatter. This is Captain Johnson speaking on behalf of General Nelson. The radio buzzes through some static. The man speaking had been doing a lot of the talking since the attack began. "We are mobilizing everyone that we can to the fronts right now in response to the recent advance. All units who do not have standing orders, make your way to your superior officers to await further response. This is not a drill. We have already lost 3 of our fronts." Rambart suddenly races up the hill, waving the radio over his head. "Captain, I got the coalition leader down there on the radio." Rob nods but says nothing. Instead, his mind races on what he might say. He didn't want to continue this fight, not now at least. There was a much greater fight to attend to, and Rob can't help but think that the coalition troops hiding in the mine complex below might think the same thing. "This is Captain Rob Carrollsfeld of Paratrooper Company E4A, call sign Olympia. I am requesting your immediate and unconditional surrender." The coalition soldier on the other end is quick to respond. "You think we'd surrender to militia troops like you? We remember what you all did at Settlers Ranch." "We." Rob shakes his head and interrupts. "There's a bigger fight to be had. You've heard the same reports I have about the front. I want to end things here and get over there to fight for my planet. I recommend you do the same." The coalition soldier scoffs and replies, "This lousy rock ain't my home. None of us are from here." I'd leave you all to rot just as soon as I'd surrender." Rob looks up and sees Rombard's nervous gaze. This wasn't going to plan, far from it. Frowning, he then tries another approach with the coalition soldier. "If my count is right, we might just have you outnumbered. And I know for a fact that we've got you outclassed. If you don't want to fight on the front, then at least surrender, and we'll let you get out with your life. You don't need to die here." There is a harsh laugh, almost a cackle, before the coalition soldier answers, "I'd never surrender to an Allegrian." Rob sees that the feed was dead now. There would be no negotiating his way out of this one. Looking over at Rambart, he offers a half shrug and asks, "You are thinking the same thing that I am, right?" Rambart perks up and asks that we can't just walk away from this, and that they've got the weapons that we need for what we're about to do. "That's it," Rob nods somberly. The coalition was using the old mines and their infrastructure as a spot to store more than just small arms. There were artillery pieces, vehicles, spacecraft, and much, much more. It was so much that, after being briefed, Rob had to ask if Nels was joking. He wasn't. It was all quite serious. Now that Rob was looking at it all, he could verify it as well. This really was the best haul to date in this war. His greatest concern had been about how he might get away with all of the wealth of supplies that he was about to free from the coalition's grasp. "Assemble the men. We're going to wipe them out," Rob says after a beat. "We'll strike from the east and west, but set up a few teams to the south and north to take care of anyone that might try to escape or try to sabotage the equipment that we're here for." Rambart nods. "Understood, sir." Rob watches as Rambart leaves, and he casts one last look at the glowing horizon that he was about to fight for. All of this had started out as a way to tactically acquire some goods for Nels and the Allegrian militia in order to kill more coalition soldiers. Now it was just one of the many battles for Allegra that were raging on tonight. "I just hope that we can get there in time to help," Rob whispers to himself as his eyes drop back to the mines. Grabbing his rifle, he starts down the hill, following Rambart's path. He was about to lead his men into a fight that he knew would haunt him for years. It was one thing to kill someone who stood a chance. Knowing that the enemy might win gave Rob and everyone else a sense of duty and fear, and a million other emotions that drove them forward and forced their hand. This fight, meanwhile, was going to be a slaughter. The coalition soldiers may as well be unarmed. They didn't have the training or experience needed to take on Rob's tried and tested company. Standing afar off from where the coalition soldiers are holding out, Rob reminds himself that his orders were to kill them all in the very beginning. This wasn't all his doing. Nels had, true to his form, ordered that not a single enemy soldier walk away after the fighting began. According to Nels, that would convince the coalition forces to give up before fights began in the future. So far, that hadn't worked. It seemed to steel their resolve and make the fighting even harder. However, that was just Rob's experience. He knew that things could be playing out differently for others in other battles. He hoped that Nels would be proven right, otherwise, all of this could just end up being chalked up as senseless killings. "They're still all in there?" Rob asks a nearby soldier, Henry Wolfe, as he points at a small collection of single-story, cheaply built office buildings at the center of the mine complex. Several of the buildings were already shot up and 2 were on fire, but he can still see some signs of enemy activity in them. "Yes," Sir Wolfe nods. Rob nods and walks away without saying anything. He waits until Billy has made some distance, and then pulls out his radio. Confirming he is on the correct channel, he says, "Rambart, is there anything we need that they've got in there?" There is a pause before Rambart queries, "Sir." Looking back at the office buildings, Rob repeats, "Is there anything that we need inside those buildings that we need? Intel, maps, weapons?" "No, Sir," Rambart answers. "Then I don't want to risk our men," Rob says. "Get me an artillery piece or 2. We're going to blast them." Half an hour passes before everything is squared away for Rob's change of plans. He had originally wanted to be the one pulling the trigger on the artillery, but he ended up choosing to stand on the front lines with his men. From there he would ensure that there weren't any enemy soldiers who escaped. Rob knew that he had all the time in the world to clear the enemy out since the coalition was busy elsewhere, so he figured it was time for him to choose the easiest and safest route for his people. He was responsible for his company, not for the enemy beyond. "Take out the center building," Rob orders. Seconds later, there is a boom, and then the small office trailer at the center of the mess of structures is consumed in a ball of fire. Rob emerges slightly from his cover in time to feel the shockwave of the blast. A slight scowl takes hold of his face and Rob barks, "Southern one, now." There is another artillery report and another explosion. The process continues, one by one, until there are just 3 buildings left. Motioning at a nearby squad, Rob orders, "You 10 on me." Without looking back to confirm that his orders were followed, Rob begins marching ahead. He knew his men well enough to know that they wouldn't shy away from an order. As he walks forward, Rob barks into his radio, "Last one in the east. Get rid of it." Another small building is consumed in a ball of fire. Burning debris rains down all around it after the blast, and only a blackened skeleton remains where the building once stood. "Last one in the north needs cleared out," 2 Rob orders. Another building disappears. "Save the last one for us," Rob radios his team. "That will be all for now." "Yes, sir," Rambart radios back after a few beats. Rob forges on ahead, stepping around larger pieces of debris and over dead coalition soldiers. This wasn't his first fight, it was nothing that he hadn't seen before. "Take positions around the building," Rob orders his small team. Motioning at 4 people, he adds, "You 4 on me. We're going in there." Again, the soldiers comply wordlessly. Rob walks in front of the sole remaining building and looks it over quickly one last time. He'd been studying it the entire fight and was near certain that the one in charge, the one who threw aside his olive branch, was in there. This was personal, as far as Rob was concerned. This soldier, whoever they were, had gotten every soldier under their command killed. Execution was the only option for someone like that, as far as Rob saw things. The man wasn't worthy of a death like that of his soldiers. An honorable death in a fight or a quick end from artillery was too good for him. Shaking his head in a mix of disgust and annoyance, Rob stomps up the stairs to the building and its sole door. He pauses long enough for his men to form up behind him and then readies his rifle. Everyone inside had to know that Rob and his men were outside, and that was sort of the point of his entire charade. He wanted the man with the radio trembling in his boots. It was bonus points, as far as Rob was concerned, if those boots were now filled with pee. "Flashbang ready," Sir Rich Gomez whispers. Rob nods, kicks the door in, and steps aside. Inside, seemingly every weapon available begins going off. Meanwhile, Rob and his team wait, hunched over, as Gomez tosses in not 1, but 2 flashbangs. A second later, there is a pop, a flash, and some smoke. The shooting doesn't stop, but it slows down dramatically, and Rob can't hear bullets whizzing out of the door anymore. Satisfied, he stands and races through the door. Taking a sharp right, he shoots 2 enemy soldiers, and much to his satisfaction, he spots a man who is clutching a radio. Glancing over his shoulder, he sees his team clearing the rest of the building and dropping everyone in their path. Turning back to the radio man before him, Rob reaches out, grabs him by the shoulder, and throws him quite forcibly to the ground. He grins sadistically when he hears the telltale sound of bones cracking as his reward. "Clear the other rooms. I've got what I came for," Rob orders. Looking back at the man before him, Rob confirms that his target is unarmed, and he then grabs him by the leg and drags him out like some sort of animal. He drags the soldier through the gravel outside several paces and finally stops, just to see that the soldier is still lying face down. Spinning the man over, Rob looks over his handiwork and then forces the barely conscious soldier onto his knees. Satisfied, Rob looks around the little war zone, takes a breath, lines up his pistol to the back of the man's head, and shoots. A beat passes, then another. Rob feels his pulse slow as he finally calms down. As far as he was concerned, the debt had now been paid that the rude soldier owed him. Pulling out his radio, Rob orders, leave whatever wounded are still alive unless they give you a reason to do otherwise. If they survive, then they live. If not, well. Rob turns and watches as his breaching team files out of the last remaining building. Their expressions don't betray their thoughts, but Rob was used to that with his people. They had all seen worse, and they had all found their own sorts of coping mechanisms and such. A breach like this was just one more straw to add to the pile. They'd deal with this after the war, same as everything else. This wasn't the worst thing they had ever seen or ever done. Taking a deep, slow breath, Rob then continues into his radio. Secure all of the gear we can haul. We're going to the front. Let's see what the bulwark is like when we get there. If it's even left, Gomez grunts. Rob lowers his radio, chuckles, and nods, yeah, if it's left. Looking west, Gomez adds, and if it ain't still standing, then we'll need everything that we can get anyway. I ain't about to run away from whatever these beat things are. I hope you enjoyed this story. If you did, please be sure to give it a like and check out the link in the description to check out the first book in the series that this story is a part of. Caleb Fast has quite a few books available on Amazon. Check them out if this story was enjoyable for you. Book sales keep published authors like him coming back to write more for our channel.